Army. That will be, April, yes, I remember it very well, April 1944. The Army. In a way, you could say that it was my university, insofar as, I had never left home and lived communally, ever. And I was very frightened about it. I was really very frightened indeed. I had such apprehension, even about small things. I mean, the thing that engrossed me was, what do I do about undressing? Taking my clothes off with a lot of other people present. I'd always had my own room, grown up with the parents, and I thought, this will be awful, the humiliation. So it started off, of course, with the medical. So I had a pre-taste of what it was like to take your clothes off, because there were hundreds of us all taking our clothes off and going from table to table where doctor after doctor gave you various sorts of examinations, And eventually I found myself sitting outside being told to wait, and they said, well, we haven't made up our mind about you at all. And they looked at me as though I was some sort of physical specimen that they weren't sure about. I was sent for again, and they said, now, we've found that you are anemic, you see. You haven't got the necessary blood standard for A1, but we will give you a grading B2, and you will go for training to Carlisle. And I was sent off to Carlisle, which was actually medieval. I think it's still there, the castle. And the Border Regiment were there, and the King's Own and the Loyals. I don't know which one. One of their march pasts was da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, bum-bum, that one. And that was the only thing I really enjoyed about it all, the marching, because there was rhythm, there was music, and we weren't allowed to sing. We sang outrageous versions of songs. It was instead of Long Way to Tipperary, it was A Long Way to Tickle Mary, which I thought was terribly bold and naughty. I suppose in a sense, you see, this was a great liberation thing. I'd been a very enclosed person, in actual fact. I always went up to the room, locked myself in, listened to the radio, or read my poetry, or wrote poetry. I wrote a lot of poetry. I suppose now, looking back on it, if I reread it, I'd blush. It was so, jeune, whatever you call that French word, was it, jeune? But that was the sort of life I'd led, and consequently the army, you see, forcing me to chat to people. I was suddenly flung into the maelstrom. I had to make contact, I had to talk, I had to undress, I had to do all the things that 60 men in a barrack room have to do. Oh, it was an incredible period, looking back on it all. And then in the middle of it all, they called for me and said, we've decided you're not really fit. You're absolutely right. You should never have been on general training. You'll have to go to a PDC. I'd never heard of a PDC. But alone, out of 500 gentlemen, I was sent to this PDC, which stood for Physical Development Centre. And there I was paraded with other men who were all sort of emaciated, Belson-looking creatures. And we all had to go into fields with these blankets, lie on them and do remedial exercises. Most of my exercises consisted of twiddling the toes. They were convinced that my feet weren't strong enough for marching. And the barrack room life was communal, and it was always talk. Sometimes people would sing, quite different from the background that I'd been used to. The final test was an assault course, which was unbelievable. I mean, you had to do so many ludicrous things. Well, to me, they were ludicrous. You had to stand on one bank of a river. They threw across, the soldier who'd gone across the river threw back a rope which hung in the middle unless he threw it right back to you. And you had to take hold of this rope, get on it with your pack and your rifle and everything, and swing right across the river, land on the other side of the bank, and throw the rope back at the other man, you see. So I thought, oh, well, that's quite easy. I quite like balancing, and acrobatics. So I got on this rope when it was flung to me, shot across the river, landed on the other side, and was so delighted. And I stood there saying, I've done it, marvellous, and forgot that I should have held the rope. You see what I mean? You should still hold it in order to fling it back to the other soldier. That's the whole point of an assault course. I let it go from my hand, and it just drifted back into the middle of the river, which was no help to anybody. And the officer in charge said, well, you've ruined that, haven't you, chum? You can just go and wade back in that river and get it. And take it to the bank, because you should hand it to the other soldier, you see. And I said, but I can't. I mean, I've got all my stuff on. And he said, well, you go back and do it. That's the whole point of an assault course. So I had to go all through this water, and I was up to my eyes in it. I mean, I can't tell you how deep it was. And, I mean, do the rest of the assault course, having thrown the rope to the other boy, I had to do the rest of the assault course with all this sog in the boots, the socks and everything. It was awful. And really, I couldn't make it. I hadn't got that kind of stamina. And we got to a part of the road where I just thought, I'm going to sit down. I'm not going to complete this course ever. Because the route march itself on the course was about 4 or 5 miles. And by this time, the blisters and the water really had wreaked havoc with me. So I sat down, and this sergeant in charge came by on a bicycle. They didn't do any work at all. They just came by on bikes and said, "Now, come along, you've been carrying on, you know." And he said, "What's the matter with you?" And I said, "Oh, I can't. No, the blisters, terrible blisters, I can't do any more." And he said, "I'll tell you what, you know, don't you, that if you don't complete this course, you simply will be kept back and start all over again. In other words, another 12 weeks of all this going into fields with blankets and twiddling your toes and doing all these ridiculous things. So it's the best thing to do is cheat it, you see, and I'll give you a ride on my bike and take you to the winning post, and then I'll drop you off, and you walk in as though you've done it all." So I said, "Oh, thank you, lovely," because I adored that. So I sat on the crossbar, and he biked, and we got, well, very near to the place. He didn't actually take me right in, otherwise it would have been too obvious. And I walked in, fresh as the days, and said, "I've finished." And the officer said, "Very good. In spite of the fact that you're covered in water, you've completed the course before the others. That's incredible. Williams, you're A1. And I said, "Oh, thank you so much," beaming, loving it all. And I was sent back to Carlisle as a fully-fledged A1 soldier. There I was seen by a personnel selection officer who said, "Well, it's been decided now, as you have had some experience as a draftsman, we're not going to use you for soldiering at all." So it was all a waste of time, complete waste of time. "We're going to put you," he said, "into survey section of the Royal Engineers, and you'll be posted to a map reproduction section." And I was. I was put into a lorry and taken to a transit camp at a place called Callian. And I loathed it as soon as I arrived there. The heat was appalling. There were mosquitoes. We were all issued with mosquito nets. And my first duty there in this transit camp was night guard on the armory. You were just told you would be night guard on the armory. There were two of us, actually. We had to do a perimeter walk with rifles and go right the way round this armory, where all these guns and hand grenades and everything was stored, and meet each other at another point and say all is well or some rubbish, and then all go all the way back again, you see. Well, my tour started at about 2 o'clock in the morning, going round this perimeter, which was quite a large armory. And this other soldier had been much longer in the transit camp than me, and he really knew much more about it than I did. And anyway, the heat was terrible. There were these awful sort of bullfrogs. It was awful noises in Callian, and these terrible mosquitoes, and you can always tell they came, this awful noise as they came near you, and you kept banging your skin. And this man came round the perimeter, met me, and he said, "All is well," or whatever he was supposed to say. And I said, "Oh, yes, it's all well, I suppose. Nobody's going to come near this armory anyway." It was in the middle of a military camp. It was hardly like they'd get through the main gates. And he said, "Would you like a fag?" And I said, "Yes, I'd love," because I thought the idea of having a cigarette would, with the smoke, keep these awful mosquitoes away. And this heat and this time of night, and I thought, "Oh, yes, let's have a fag." So I lit it, and we were both smoking, standing there chatting. And suddenly, out of the blackness, a voice at my elbow said, "Are you smoking? Soldier, are you smoking?" And of course, it was too late. I couldn't hide it. I said, oh, yes, I am." It was an officer who was inspecting the guard. And he chose to come out very silently, and catch anyone that was doing anything wrong. This other soldier simply swallowed the cigarette, lit cigarette whole. He simply swallowed it. It was an old hand. It was, he knew what to do. But I was standing there holding it like a duchess, quite high. And I said, "Well, yes, I was smoking." He said, you know very well it's an offence to smoke on guard, don't you, Williams? You know this is an offence. It's against army regulations. You're on guard, guarding an armory. And a damned important building it is, too, in time of war." And I said, "Yes, well, I mean, my nerves were on edge." He said, "Shut up. You're under arrest." I was taken away with the picket, put in cells for the night. And I sat in this cell thinking, I've got a criminal record now. Because, a charge is a charge in the army. It goes on your crime sheet. I thought, what am I going to do? And the sergeant in charge came in, sat in the cell. He said, "What are you going to say when you're brought up on charge tomorrow before the commanding officer?" And I said, "Well, I'll have to say the truth. I was having a cigarette." And he said, "Well, listen, you just arrived in India. You could say the heat was getting you down." I said, "Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, I'll say that. The heat was getting me down. Yes, I felt nervous." "That's right." He said, "You could say you were very nervous. I'll back you up. I'll say that when you came on guard, you looked a bit white and a bit frightened." I said, "Yes, that's right. Oh, I'll say I was very frightened." I got quite worked up. Already, you see, I was beginning to be a very good actor. So I thought, yes, I'll get very worked up. So the time it came, I was marched in front of this commanding officer who said, "Smoking on guard, a very severe crime indeed. What have you got to say for yourself?" I said, "Oh, well, I was totally worked up, you see, and I was in a very nervous state in the heat, and being in a place I wasn't used to. I had a sort of mental nervous breakdown, And I started actually crying in the office. I said, I don't know what happened to me. Oh, sir, you misunderstand. And this officer got terribly embarrassed because I was leaning over the desk doing all this right at him. And he said to this sergeant, "Oh, take him away. This man is obviously not with it at all. He's very ill. He obviously needs the MO. This is not a subject for military discipline. He obviously needs a doctor. The man's ill." I said, yes, I need it. Oh, yes, I was a doctor. I was taken out, practically incoherent. So the sergeant said, "You did very well, mate, keep it up." So we're going across to the doctor. I'm going, oh, yes, it's the heat. Oh, it's the heat. Oh, it's terrible, you see. I thought, how long have I got to do this? Because I got to the doctor's waiting room and he wasn't ready. He was seeing other soldiers who obviously had real things wrong with them. And there was me sitting there going, oh, yes, it's terrible, and keeping on, you see. And I thought, well, I can't keep this up forever. But eventually I got into the doctor and I kept it all going. And he said, "Yes, all right, this boy obviously needs sedation. This is a question of heat. It's probably a heat stroke, minor heat stroke he's having." I was put into sick bay and put in bed. Well, I had no thermometer put in my mouth, temperature taken, special diet, and goodness knows what. Others that were in there eventually, I found out, were doing just as much malingering as I was. But I thought, I'm onto a very good thing here. It lasted about 3 days, and then an Indian doctor came around and looked at me and said, "I don't think there's much wrong with you. Stand up." Got me out of the bed in pyjamas. Said, "Walk from here to there." Gave me 1 or 2 tests for the eyes and said, "Get your uniform back on." And so within minutes I was out, the game was up. I thought, well, it'll all come round again. I'll be back on another charge, you see, for malingering or something. But as luck would have it, a posting came through. As I told you, I was with the Royal Engineers, and I was survey section, I was a draftsman. Because in civilian life I had been an apprentice draftsman, so they put that down as experience. And so I was posted to where they desperately needed a lithographic draftsman, to a place called Dehradun, which was up in the, well, literally the foothills of the Himalayas. Quite different from Bombay, cool, verdant, and very lovely. And I was among fellow draftsmen. There was no real army discipline in the sense of parading and square bashing or anything like that. I had a lovely time. We were stationed, this map reproduction unit I was with, in a place called Kuranegala, which had been the old capital of Ceylon. And it was really here, you know, that I started acting, because it was a tiny unit. We were stationed in this coconut grove. We just built huts underneath because the heat was terrific. And we just built these huts underneath the trees. And I did a terrible show there. I mean, looking back on it, it must have been terrible. I did impersonations of Nellie Wallace. Of course I did Winston Churchill. I was always doing Winston Churchill. I thought I was marvellous at Winston Churchill. I was always going, "We shall fight on the battlefield, on the landing ground, and in the air. We shall never surrender." I thought I was marvellous at that. Of course, all I was really doing was giving an impression. It wasn't really any good, in the sense of reproducing the vocal quality. You know, it was just giving an impression, you know what I mean? But I thought I was a superb impersonator. I used to go around with cigars stuck in my mouth, always doing it. You know? It was ludicrous. But I put these shows on, stood on tables in the Nathy, dancing about and laughing about. And I really went down very well. I suppose because they were so bored, you know, there was nothing else. They hadn't even got a radio in that unit. We all saved and saved and saved and got enough money to actually buy a radio in that unit, which we put into the British mess. And that caused something of an incident, because this unit was 500 Sikhs and about 25 white Royal Engineers. The rest were Sikhs and engineers. Well, the white content decided all to go swimming and left me as sole NCO in charge of the camp with these 500 Sikhs. Well, I was lying in this bed with a mosquito net down, because it was a very hot afternoon, and though I was duty officer, well, duty NCO, you know, I thought, well, there's nothing really to do. I mean, nothing was happening. So I thought, oh, I'll just lie down, put this mosquito net down, and just have a quiet snooze. And I was woken up by this radio blaring. I thought, well, that's very odd. All these troops who own this radio, because we paid for it, you see, we bought it ourselves, have gone. They've all left the camp to go swimming. Left me, you know, in charge. I thought, well, who's playing the radio? So I wrapped a towel round the middle, so I was sleeping naked, walked across to this mess where this radio was housed, and found all these Sikhs sitting, listening to our radio, which wasn't allowed, strictly against the rules, because the mess radio was only supposed to be played in the evening. So I went in there and said, you all get out of here. You've no right to be sitting there listening to the radio. You should all be getting on with your work, because there was work to be done. They were in charge of the MT section. There were lorries to be cleaned, you know, all that sort of thing. And I said, you must all go and get on with your work and stop listening to the radio. And they were very angry. And one of them said, but we wish to hear... I said, I'm not interested in what you wish to hear. You get out of here and turn that radio off immediately. I am NCO in charge of this camp. Do you hear? Get out. And I was very, grand about it all. And they all filed out, looking at me, loathing. And I went back to bed and pulled the mosquito net down and thought, yes, I've shown them, her, so I'm not NCO in charge for nothing, dearie. And went off to sleep, you see. I was woken rudely about half an hour later by the officer commanding. And he said, we've just come back from swimming and found the whole camp in an appalling hiatus. There's terrible trouble here. Apparently, while we've been away, you emptied the mess of the Indians and told them to get out and stop listening to the radio. And I said, well, yes, of course, that radio, as you well know, is only supposed to be played in the evening because the batteries will run out. He said, look here, those men were trying to listen to a broadcast, and a very important broadcast too, from Delhi, about the independence of their country. And you must surely realize, Williams, we are living with Indians. This is a mixed regiment, Sikhs and English together, and you must surely realize that at this period of history, where their country is about to emerge into independence, then race relations are very important, a very ticklish subject. Now then, you've offended them deeply. Telling them to leave the building, stop listening to the radio. You must go, and you must go over to their commanding officer, the Subadar Major, and you must say, Subadar Sahab, I wish to apologize for this. So I said, oh, I don't think... He said, it's absolutely essential that you do this. Now get dressed immediately, put your best uniform on and go and do it. So I had to put a battle dress on, you know, with the full gear, get the rifle, get it all done. I had to put the blanco on the belt and blanco the gaiters, polish the boots. I had to march onto the barracks square where he'd lined up his regiment, this Subadar Major. I had to go, present arms, bang the rifle, salute the rifle butt, you know, and then him... grind the rifle to the ground and say, Subadar Major, I wish to apologize. I acted hastily. I acted stupidly. I said words which my heart did not mean. I hope that you will find it in your heart to forgive me. I expected this Indian officer to salute me back and say something to the effect of, I accept your apology, something like that. In actual fact, he put his arms on my shoulders and embraced me. And his regiment cheered, and he said, this is a fine thing you've done, and we would like you now to come to our mess and eat with us. And, you know, that really taught me something about race relations, insofar as the Eastern, and you know what I mean, the Indian continent does produce a quite different mentality to ours. An Englishman will accept an apology in a certain way. He'll still have reservations about what you've done. You know what I mean? But certainly the Indian mentality, I've always found this. Once the apology was made, there was no question of, well, I still have my reservations. There was an open-hearted response which says, this has been said, now it has been unsaid, it is totally erased, and we are friends forever. So in a sense, that was the most marvellous lesson, I suppose, of my life. Well, it was while I was in Ceylon that I saw this notice, because by then the war had more or less finished, VJ Day had taken place, and they put this notice up saying that if we felt we were in the wrong kind of regiment, we could apply to join another if we had a specific talent for it. And I saw that they had formed a new organisation called Combined Services Entertainment. I thought, well, I'll get into that. I'd always fancied myself as an actor, and I'd done this bit, you know, with the troops in Ceylon. And I thought, well, I'll apply. So I saw this brigadier in charge, and he said, well, the kind of men they're asking for are song and dance. Song and dance men. Now, can you sing and dance? And I said, oh, yeah, you're kidding. I mean, I am the song and dance man of all time. It's all lies. I never sung and danced at all. I said, I can do it beautifully. So he said, well, get down to the docks, get down to Colombo docks, and get the first troop ship to Singapore. That's where they're auditioning for CSE. So I went to Colombo docks, and I stood there with my kit bag and waited for a troop ship. One came. All the troops that were going on board were Cameron and Southern Highlanders, and they were all being marched on the ship by their officers. But eventually the ship arrived in Singapore, and I was sent to this place, the Victoria Theatre, to do this audition. I was met by an officer called Captain Oms, OHMS. He actually called that Captain Arms. That was a curious name. His name he changed afterwards and called himself Vaughan and became a very famous actor and married Billy Whitelaw. But he was a captain then, and he took me up to the headquarters of CSE, where I was auditioned. The audition was a fiasco, a total fiasco. I came on and did these terrible impersonations, you see. They said, "You're song and dance." I said, no, that's a mistake. They said, "But it's down here on paper. You told them in Ceylon you were song and dance." I said, no, I didn't say anything to the guy. No, that's all a mistake. Typing error, you see. No, I'm impressions. He said, "Oh, well, you better do these impressions." So I did the Churchill, and I did Mabel Constant-Duros, and I thought I was doing very well. There wasn't a sound from the front, and eventually there were brigadiers and people all sitting there. And they said, no, this won't do at all, RTU. And this call echoed all around the theatre, RTU. Well, I shot into the wings and said to this corporal, "What does it mean?" And he said, "Return to unit." And I said, I can't go back. I can't, because I've left the engineers saying I was going to be the star of CSE. And I thought, I can't go back. And they said, "Well, all right, we'll tell you what we'll do with you. You can, as you have had experience with these maps, drawing maps, you can obviously do posters." I said, "Oh, yes, I'm very good at that." They said, "Well, you can stay on with us as a poster draftsman." And that's what I did. I did design their posters, and eventually I went down to the theatre to get the billing one day for the show that I was supposed to be drawing the poster for, and they said, "Would you read in for this boy who's got malaria? He's off." And I said, "Certainly." And I read in, and this producer said, "You're very good. You're a very good actor." I said, "Well, thank you. Yes, I have great talent in that direction." They said, "Well, you must come into this show with us and leave all these silly poster drawings for somebody else. Can you find somebody to take over?" I said, "Yes, of course I can." I shot down to the REs and got another draftsman to take over, you see. And I went into the shows. So I got into CSE.